Hello. Today I'm going to go over the lesson and just to go just a little bit over the questions that go with the reading. So today's lesson is about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and so we're just kind of picking off of President Kennedy and his actions in Latin America. And so this was just sort of the proof of his failed connections, especially with Cuba and the communist leader there, Castro. So I'm going to share my screen to show you the lesson that you're working on for today. And so the directions are here. Number one, you're going to watch this YouTube video on the history of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So it's just a Ed video and just kind of goes over it, and it's pretty interesting. So I think you should watch that first to give you kind of some background. And then the next part of the assignment is to then look at this document, the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so there's a map. Hold on, I gotta move my screen here. There is a map, and then there is a reading, and there's questions directly on the reading. So let me just scroll to those first. So like right here, but you're gonna actually answer those questions on the document that I also assigned with this. So anyway, when you first open the document, I wrote at the top here, read the introduction in blue. So that's this. So I'd recommend definitely downloading this as a PDF so you can see it better. But anyway, and then it says to look at the map, which here's the map, and then continue on to the next 2 pages of the reading. Okay, so I try to add some little notes here, just a couple for this assignment. Okay, so there's an introduction about what's happening here. And then just to give you an idea of the map and some distance, because it's hard to tell here unless you had a scale of how, like, or what this even means. So we're looking obviously at Cuba. This is the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the crisis was that the Soviet Union had delivered missiles to Cuba, and they had done this secretly, but there was aerial view of them putting together the missiles. And so just to give you an idea of the concern of the president and then eventually the American public, Cuba is about 90 miles. I have my little cursor here. Cuba's 90 miles to Florida. And the capability of the missiles that the Soviet Union delivered and was assembling there was actually over 1,500 miles. Okay, so again, the capability of the missiles that were delivered in Cuba were 1,500 miles. And again, Cuba is only 90 miles from Florida. So obviously a big deal. Okay, so that's what this map is showing you, like kind of the different capability and how far they could actually reach, which would be well into Canada. But obviously the threat was the United States. Okay, so this first section here talks about the discovery. And so these photographs were taken by planes that were flying above Cuba. So that's what that talks about. And then after this discovery, a group of advisors who were helping the president got together and met every day for 13 days, and they became known as the XCOM. So that's the this group's, I don't know, nickname was. And anyway, President Kennedy tried to listen to the advisors and advice of military specialists and others to make his decision on what to do. So that's what this talks about here. And then I know I talked about this in class, but MAD is that idea of mutual assured destruction. And so both Kennedy and Khrushchev, the Soviet leader at the time, understood the destruction of the nuclear weapons, and that if one, used them first, then the other would retaliate, which meant that both of them would be destroyed. And so that's that idea of being mutually just, assured that both would be destroyed. And so this just kind of reviews that information. So I actually was listening to a book about the deliberation that Kennedy listened to and went through with XCOM and how he came to his decision. There were some people who did suggest straight up bombing Cuba. Some people suggested to try to work secretly with Castro, and some suggested to take more of a subtle approach. And that's what Kennedy ended up doing, because again of this more of this MAD idea, and he didn't want to escalate things. And so what he had decided to do was, he called it a quarantine, which right now to us, we're really well aware what that means. But it was more of a blockade. Cuba is an island. So he really just put up a barrier around Cuba to not allow any more ships to come. Okay, and then ships did start to approach this blockade, and at one point there was like this standoff, and Kennedy just really had to sit and wait and hope that the Soviet Union wasn't going to try to break through, and because if they did, they had threatened, the United States had threatened to take action. So they sit and were waiting, and the ship didn't come through. And so as a result, as you see here, it says crisis averted. The last thing, well, actually, I want you to pay attention to question 8, so thinking about how you would have responded to these letters that went back and forth, because Khrushchev was definitely lying and his advisor was lying, more or less. But anyway, that's kind of what this question's asking you about. So try to think about it if you were in his shoes. And the final question is, after this crisis, what do you think the relationship is going to be between the two? So again, these questions that are on the document itself are here on a Google Doc for you to kind of fill in. And so, obviously use the text to help you with that and put yourself in Kennedy's shoes. So anyway, I think that is it. So if you have any questions, give me an email or send me an email. And otherwise, I'll look forward to seeing you next week.